If I were to really summarize, thank you, by the way, son. If I were to summarize this series in one sentence, it would be this. Don't worship idols. That's it, you can go home. If only it were that easy, right? But it's not. It is that simple, but it's not that easy. One of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. I was first introduced to him back in school middle school, when I had summer reading, which was awesome. And I believe it was either Prince Caspian or Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Either way, it was one of the books from the Chronicles of Narnia series, but he also wrote other famous works like the Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity and other famous books and novels. However, this morning what I'd like to talk about is the time that he boarded a bus for heaven. Obviously, I'm not talking about him doing this in a literal sense, but rather through the astounding picture that he paints in his book called The Great Divorce. In this book, it examines the question as to why people are supposed to live their lives in full commitment to God. And they get this choice of are they going to do that or not. And so to summarize this book much better than I did this sermon series, C.S. Lewis is showing that through the course of this book that what we're basically doing is standing at the very gate of heaven. And then we're making this choice between eternal glory or the empty promises of earth. Hence what he then refers to as the great divorce between heaven and earth. And so in his book, Lewis talks about getting onto a bus with a group of fellow ghosts who have passed away. And shortly they're going to be dropped off at a sort of depot or way station, you could call it, where they're going to end up making their decisions regarding eternity. Now, obviously, salvation doesn't work this way, but just stay with me because this book is really just kind of an extended metaphor. And so each person that steps off the bus, this bright, shining figure, they step off the bus, and this bright, shining figure steps out from heaven to talk to them. And they encourage them to make the journey into heaven and to choose the glory of God over the emptiness of earthly desires. And these people, they're not angels, but rather they're people from that specific person's life that have now been saved. So people step off the bus, person comes out from their life to talk to them, and so forth. And then eventually it's this woman's turn, whose name is Pam. So Pam steps off the bus, and the shining figure steps out to greet her. And normally that'd be a pretty incredible sight, but she's instead filled with disappointment. She's filled with disappointment when she realizes who it is that stepped out to greet her. The person's name is Reginald, and it's her younger brother. But see, Pam, this whole trip, she was just hoping and praying that it was going to be Michael, who was her son that she ended up outliving. She devoted her entire life to him, and she just wanted to see him just so badly. But see, Reginald explains that she's not ready for that. She's not ready to see Michael. Instead, she first must be eager to meet with God himself, and then the rest of the blessings of heaven will follow. And see, I love this part of the illustration because what C.S. Lewis is doing here is he's making this metaphor for basically saying that God isn't simply a way to get into heaven, but rather heaven is the way that we get to be with God. And see, outside of the metaphor, again, we know that Jesus is the only way to the Father, but you get the point. And so Reginald says to her, and I'm quoting the book here, he says, "I'm afraid the first step is a hard one. But after that, you're going to go on like a house on fire. When you learn to want someone else besides Michael." And so Pam's just kind of like, okay, what are you talking about? You know what? It's fine. I'll just do whatever it is that you want. I'll do whatever's necessary, because really just the sooner that I do that, then the sooner I get to see my boy. And then Reginald responds with, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, "You're using God as a means to an end instead of wanting God for his own sake." See, God doesn't come in second. He doesn't even come in tied for first. He comes in first. And throughout this story, it becomes clear that Pam's love for Michael, the love that she had for her son, went kind of beyond that. It became this obsession in her life. And after he died, she sacrificed her relationships with her children, with her husband, with her parents, all on the altar of adoration for her son. And she, even at one point, she says the phrase in the book, I'm quoting directly here, "No one has a right to come between me and my son, not even God." And see, the sad part of this story is that it makes it very clear that Pam is so set on her views and so unwavering in her ways that she ultimately chooses her own destination. But if we break down Lewis's view, what he's saying in this book, just right down to the foundation, to the very root of what he's getting at, he's saying that our foundation, our first love, should be to the Lord our God, and that we're able to then love one another like Christ laid out for us when he responded to the lawyer's question in Luke 10:27, which says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." See, Kyle Idleman, he talks about it like this, and I think this is a great illustration. He says to picture our life like a bicycle wheel. And every spoke on the wheel represents somebody different. So one spoke might be your mom, one spoke might be your dad, another one a sibling or a child or a cousin or a grandparent, a spouse, so forth. But it's so easy, and so often we just make God another spoke on the wheel. But the thing is that God's not interested in being one of the spokes on the wheel. Instead, God's to be the center hub that all the spokes come from, that they're all connected to. Or just to kind of summarize that, he's to be the center of our ever-turning and spinning world. And like we talked about last week, these things that we can end up making idols in our lives, and today we're going to be talking about family and relationships. These relationships that we build are good things. And that's the danger of idols, is that they're usually good things that just get elevated to this position of ultimate authority in our life. And so the same is also true this morning. We're supposed to love our children. We're supposed to love our parents. We're supposed to love our siblings and our grandparents and our spouses wholeheartedly. But we're always supposed to love them in the context of our primary love for God. He's to be the center of our wheel and our deepest love. And see, when our relationship with God, when he serves as that foundation for our relationships with everyone else, it's what this morning I'd like us to call a top-button truth. And here's what that means. Have you ever just been in such a hurry in the morning that, or maybe you're getting dressed in the dark, I don't know, but that you just throw on your clothes, throw on your shirt, you start buttoning it up, one button, the next button, the next button, the next button, the next button, and then there's an extra button. And you get to undo all the other buttons because you missed the top button. See, when you mess up that top button, you mess up all the others too. You get to the bottom, and if you were to leave the house, you look ridiculous. And see, similarly, our lives should be ordered in such a way that God's the top button. Our devotion to him, our relationship with him, is the top button. And so when you get that right, when you get that in order, then every relationship, family or friend, becomes far more satisfying. If you get that top button wrong, things fall apart. You can look ridiculous. See, Pam's love for her son, Michael, in the Great Divorce, it's something as beautiful and powerful and important as a mother's love for her child. Really, it gets elevated to her identity. She's putting that on the throne of her heart because her primary love was for Michael. And God was just a means to an end to be able to see him again. So this good thing, this mother's love for her child, this beautiful thing, got twisted into this hideous idol that in turn resulted in her other relationships not aligning either. And like I said last week, these surface idols and these root idols, they're so sneaky in the way that Satan can cause them to slither onto the throne of our hearts. And sometimes we're just doing what we're supposed to be doing. It's just that it's stemming from love that's in the wrong order, and we don't realize it. See, Augustine, who was an early theologian, leader, writer in the Christian faith, he called these surface idols disordered loves. And I love that term. Because what he meant was that a parent should love a child. A parent Or a child should love and honor their parent, and we should love our neighbors and ourselves. That these good things and these relationships can just so easily be elevated again to that top button position. So I wouldn't blame you at all at this point in the sermon if you're sitting here this morning thinking, well, that's good for you. You did a good job writing the beginning of that, but it's going to be impossible for me to love my children or my family any less. And to that I would say that's awesome, because that's not what I'm asking you to do at all. See, we can love our children, we can love people in our lives, but the challenge today is that maybe to think of it like this: we can love them differently. And what I mean is that we can love people in the context of our devotion, of our love for God. And doing that, as we're about to see, that's one of the most loving things that we can do for any of our relationships, family or friend. So here's the question. What if we were asked right now, what if you personally were asked by God to prove that He was on the throne in your hearts, that our love for Him exceeds everything and anyone? Kind of a big question. And there's a story in Scripture that parallels C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, except it has a way better ending than Pam making the wrong decision. A way better ending of divine intervention to learn that it was only a test. In fact, I'd call it one of the most heart-wrenching stories in the Bible. It's found in Genesis chapter 22. It's the story of Abraham and Isaac. See, God promises Abraham and Sarah that they'll have a child. That's where we're going to pick up. He promises them that they're going to have a child in extreme old age. They weren't able to have one in their youth, and God asks them just to trust His promise. Then nothing. For a long time. Years. And eventually Isaac, their son, is born. That name means laughter, and I think that just summarizes really what Abraham and Sarah must have felt in that moment. But in their position, right? Test passed. All right, we did it. And then Genesis chapter 22 shows up. And starting in verse 1, it says, "After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall tell you.'" And if I were Abraham, and let's just all thank God that I'm not, because I think that my first thought and my first response would be along the lines of like, "Excuse me? You mean the Isaac that you promised for years, that Isaac? My only son Isaac, that Isaac, whom I love, like you said?" Like, I don't know. Feels weird. Feels real weird. It feels like kind of the opposite of what we should be doing with our human children. That's not Abraham's response, is it? You know, on a kind of more serious note, I think it's fascinating because that second verse, 22 verse 2, Genesis, it's the first time that the word love is used in the Bible. I think it's more fascinating that this first time that love is used in the Bible, it's in the context of sacrificing a beloved only son. Sound familiar? John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life." And you know, I think that it's easy here that we can really feel for Abraham so much, what he's going through. But, you know, on the other side, it's almost as if God had some sort of like divine knowledge, go figure, that He knew that He Himself would make this exact sacrifice of His one and only Son, whom He loved. The Bible never ceases to amaze me. And so if we could just put those verses back up real quick. I want to read verse 1. It says, "After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.'" So do you notice at the beginning, it says, after these things, God tested Abraham. So we as readers, when we read this story, we get tipped off from just the fifth word in the chapter that this is only a test. See, we know, having a complete Bible at our fingertips, that never does God require us to make a human sacrifice. In fact, we learn in several places like Deuteronomy chapter 12 and chapter 18 and 2 Kings 21, to name just a few, that he calls it detestable to him, human sacrifice. But at this point, that this is occurring, at this point in the Bible, that Abraham is given this command, those books aren't written yet. Genesis isn't written yet. Abraham doesn't know that it's a test. You know, I just imagine these scenes. I know they're not in the Bible, but I just picture these scenes of like Abraham and Sarah holding hands as their beloved son, their miracle child, whom they were, by the way, delivered the news about from angels, no less. But Abraham and Sarah just holding hands, watching him as he sleeps at night, or them pouring out prayers and caring for him at times when he gets sick. Their joy when he learns to walk, his first words. And when he gets old enough to start helping out Abraham, and the pride that Abraham must have felt as his father in that. But now this command, take him to the altar. Give him back. See, I can sit here and imagine these moments of joy and caring that Abraham and Sarah had raising Isaac, but with that command, like lay that special and wonderful son on the altar, can't imagine what he must have felt. You know, as I've read through the Bible, there's a lot of characters that I think it would be awesome to have been. Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego in the fire, protected. Sweet. Be awesome. Or Samson and his strength. I don't want the other stuff, but the strength, yep, that'd be sweet. But I don't know that Abraham is a biblical hero that I really envy in this moment. I don't think I want to be him. Because every child is a special miracle child knitted together in the womb by God, Psalm 139. See, I'd wager, I'm not a parent, but I'd wager that probably no parent wants to be Abraham right here in this moment. So let's say, if you're not a parent, let's extend the scope of the story beyond just children. Who do you love so fiercely or protectively or desperately? Who would you lay down your life for? Is it a younger brother or sister? Maybe a parent that you've always been close to? Your husband or maybe your wife? Maybe they're not even family. Let's say it's a best friend. See, here's what I'm getting at with thinking about this, is that God's greatest gifts are also his greatest tests. See, when Cassie and I, she doesn't know I'm going to tell this story, by the way, but when Cassie and I started hanging out as friends, I started keeping this journal of all the various places that we went, things that we did, important things that were said, feelings I had, that sort of thing. And I'd been single for a while, got out of some relationships that, since I'm saying this from a pulpit, were not so great. So meeting Cassie was, for, I guess, lack of a better phrase, something incredibly special, almost like an answered prayer. So I thought that keeping a journal would just be a great way to be mindful of the time that we spent together in those early days. And, you know, I was recently reading through it, and I found this entry that I wrote. It's pretty cool. It's a full month and a half before we were official or dating or whatever it is that you want to call that. But we went to go look at Christmas lights this one day, and it was just the two of us this one evening in December 2013. We did stuff earlier in the day as well. I wrote about that in the journal. I talked about kind of day that we had, what we talked about. But it was the very last words of that entry that just hit me. And I wrote the phrase, Cassie's the one. And see, I don't share that to be sappy or to earn brownie points, even though I'm gonna. But it's not why I'm sharing it. The point is that the more beautiful a thing is, like marriage, like a child, maybe like a friend that God provided just at the right time, the more beautiful that a thing is in our lives, the more capacity that thing has to become an idol. So for me, I have a wife that, because she's an answered prayer, I feel like I'll never be good enough to deserve her. So therefore, I have to guard my heart to make sure that the context in which I love her is in the context of my love for God, of my worship for God and God alone. See, I suspect that most, maybe if not all of us in this room, have someone similar. The gift, that's the test. And see, the goal is to love the gift in such a way that it makes you love the giver all the more. So let's continue. Verse 3, Genesis 22. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his only son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." I and the boy will go over there and worship. That word worship. And come again to you. I don't want us to miss that word worship. See, they're at the moment of truth. The moment for Abraham to lead Isaac up the mountain to be sacrificed. This moment, it tells us so much, really, about Abraham because he's choosing God right now over anything and over anyone else. And if that's not the definition of worship, I don't know what is. Then in verses 6 through 8, Abraham and Isaac, they're walking up the mountain together. And Isaac says, "Father," and he says, "Yes, my son." He says, like, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham says, "Oh, God himself will provide the lamb for the offering, my son." And then they arrive. Abraham builds the altar, piles the wood up, just so. And then again, I can't imagine his thoughts as he binds up Isaac and places him where an animal should be. Reaches for the knife. And the Bible doesn't tell us what he's feeling, but we just see obedience, right? He never falters. And then a voice stops him right in his tracks. Verse 11 says, "But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, 'Abraham, Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me.'" Again, the first 2 commandments, the 10 commandments. We'll have no other gods before God. We will make no idols in the form of anything. Not even in the form of a beloved child. See, in the moment that push came to shove, Abraham, he showed the depth of his commitment to God. And through that commitment and love for God, he loved his son in the way that God created him to. Ordered, that top button. With God first. Do you think Abraham loved Isaac any less after nearly losing him? No way. I'd argue that we could probably almost be sure that Isaac just became even more precious to him after that. And how wonderful that when God is at the center of our lives, it enables us to love those that we already love. When they're not center, when God's center, that it enables us to love those in our life that much more. So was Isaac an idol for his father? Not at all. When I was preparing for today, I found this study of about 1,000, I think it's 1,004 adults that was conducted in July of 2007 by the Barna Group. I looked for a more recent study. That was the most recent I found, but in July of 2007, it was conducted by the Barna Group, and the people that they surveyed, they were asked to identify the most important relationship in their life. And so here's some of the findings. 7 out of 10 adults, specifically 72% of adults, said that their family or family members were the most significant connection in their life. And that's broken up into 33% said their immediate family, 22% named their spouse as their most significant relationship, and 17% identified their children. 3% said their parents, and only 19% said either God, Jesus, or the Trinity. And that's overwhelming. The survey is actually, it ended up getting published, and it's titled as God Relationship Not Most Important to Americans. Os Guinness said this: "Idolatry is the most discussed problem in the Bible, and it's one of the most powerful spiritual and intellectual concepts in a believer's arsenal." So see, the question is, if you had to choose between the gift and the giver, who wins? When we look in our lives, when we examine ourselves to see if there's surface idols starting to pop up like weeds, one of the first things that we can look to is on what shelf we place those around us. I heard a story from a pastor in which he shared a conversation that he had with a woman about false gods. She told him that she believed that her children had become false gods. But not because she made them a priority over anything else, but rather, and I think this is important, it was about letting them control her. See, what was going on with them determined if she was going to have a good day or a bad day. If there were no tantrums, if there weren't any issues, then she felt great about life. And if the opposite, then she felt bad. If they were happy, so was she. If they were sad, so was she. So you see what she's saying here? She's saying that her children had the power to fill her with either anger or peace, happiness or sadness. And she said that as time passed, it felt like she was being changed as a person. And that's exactly what a false god does. 2 Peter 2:19 says, people are slaves to whatever has mastered them. See, so when a family or a friend is placed so high that they consistently have control of our mindset, and when they have control of our emotions, well, maybe that's an indication that God's starting to lose his spot on the throne in our hearts. Maybe that root idol of always wanting approval is starting to kind of shine through, or you just want to be liked to the point that your mood and your emotions and your mindset can just shift with everyone around you. See, we so often look for things like satisfaction and meaning and significance in the wrong places. The solution simple is just let God be the one to provide those things. See, what happens when we allow someone to occupy the throne in our heart is that ultimately we hurt ourselves. Like Pam with Michael in the Great Divorce, or the woman who let her kids determine her emotions and state of mind. But further is this cliche that we say all the time is that hurt people hurt people. And I think that's because we love others best when we love God most. So if you were to go to lunch after the sermon today with your friends or family, and you decided, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to place all my happiness and mental state and emotions just in your hands. Is that okay? Does that sound good? First of all, that's a weird question, but no one in their right mind is going to agree to that. Right? If you ask me that question right now, the answer is no. Tomorrow that answer is no. The next day it's going to be no. Because only God can provide those things. And while no one's going to just outright ask someone that question, really we have a tendency to do this with others just without asking, right? I know I've talked some about holding children up high almost as trophies in our lives, but on the other side, when we do that to people, they can also feel this burden, especially children, of living up to goals when the bar has just been set unreasonably high, right? I just think about my poor dad as I shadowed him as a teenager one day at his dental practice to see if I was interested in dentistry. And so there I was watching him pull a tooth, and then the tooth started to move, and then there I wasn't. There's nowhere near that room because it was clear in about half a second that I was really not cut out for the medical world. See, in half a second, I went from potential dental school candidate to art major. 180 degrees. What a shift. See, it all worked out in God's plan, at least I like to think so. And I thank God that I was only met with support from my parents in that moment, rather than, I can't imagine what it would have been like had they not supported my life decisions, like my major in college, especially when that was way the opposite of what I was thinking at first, and then, or what I wanted to be in life. And I can't imagine the weight that I would have felt had it just always been expressed to me that I was to live up to everything that he accomplished specifically. And what would I have felt in that moment? Right? I would have grown up thinking that I could never please my parents. Maybe that root idol of approval or success would have just consumed me, just thinking you're just seeking for them to provide something that only God does. See, we shouldn't expect things like money, success, comfort, approval, control, or people to fill a God-shaped void. So what do? Do we love people less? Cut them out? Of course not. That's not biblical. But we should love people differently. And that doesn't mean less. That doesn't mean to go home and tell your spouse, church really meant a lot to me today. In fact, you're no longer the most important thing to me. So try whispering that into their ear and tell me how it goes. Rather, maybe move those relationships just off center. Put Jesus back in his rightful place. Because ironically, that's the most loving thing that we could do for anyone else. The supreme act of love for your spouse or your family or friends or anyone else is just to set your heart on Christ and to look to him to fulfill the things that only he can provide. So see, my prayer and my desire is to love my family enough to lay those relationships on the altar before God with everything else that I have and everything else that I am. That when I sing words like my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness, that those aren't words that we just sing in a service and then forget, but rather that they're applied in our home. That my hope in life is found solely in the sacrifice of a father's love for his one and only son, and not rather in the successes or failures or expectations, approval, or really achievements of anyone else. When we zoom out and we look at the story of Abraham and Isaac in the context of history and the rest of the Bible, something absolutely amazing unfolds for us. See, God sent Moses very specifically to Mount Moriah. It was a 3-day hike. Why? I'm going to go ahead and call Sutton up to prepare for the last song. But after this story, 1,000 years pass. Then in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, we learn that King David, he bought some land to build an altar and worship God. And that was the place where Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac. On that spot, Solomon would eventually build the great temple of Jerusalem, the place where priests offered sacrifices throughout the Israelite history. Those sacrifices, they took place on the same spot where Abraham offered up his son. See, if you were to look carefully today at the geography of Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount is on the side, not on the top. It's on this gentle slope on the north side of the city. And that's the spot, the north side of the city of Jerusalem, the rock, it's just perfect for building. In fact, some commentators say that this is the spot where they quarried out the stones for Solomon's temple, and then later for also building the wall. And see, as a result from the quarrying, the north side of Mount Moriah has this, like all these chunks missing out of it, and these small caves and the rock. And interestingly enough, they resemble a skull. I think this is so cool that place became known as Golgotha, or in Latin, Calvary, the place of the skull. See, when the Romans crucified Jesus, they led him out of the city to a place called Calvary, the place of the skull. And it's this amazing full circle picture that what God asked of Abraham, but ultimately didn't require of him, he did for him, or he did himself for the love of you and me in that same spot. In this whole series, in this whole sermon, you've been asked to choose God, to place him on the throne of your heart. But today, I want you to know this, that he's already chosen you. Last verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for your word. Thank you for everyone here. I just pray that as we go about our day and our week, that we just seek you. And that you are the top button. You're the center of the wheel in our spinning lives. That through our love for you, we're able to be a light, and we're able to just shine that much brighter of your glory to everyone else that we meet. It's in your Son's precious holy name we pray this. Amen.